And we're back. Welcome to Placement Series. This is episode 1, giving you an overview of all things placement. So without further ado, let's roll the video. Hello everyone, welcome back to the videos. So we are starting off this brand new series of placement series. Okay, so we're bringing these videos to you to help alleviate a lot of the anxieties and unknowns around placement. And we thought, what better way to open this series up with a broad overview of placements. Okay, so I'm really happy to be joined by Christie Robinson, who I know very well from 3 years at university. Christie was one of my lecturers and also in charge of placements while I was at university. And Christie is currently Associate Head of School of Practice Learning for the School of Health Professions at Plymouth University. So welcome to the videos and to the channel, Christie. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, James.
Pleasure, it's a pleasure. So today we're going to talk about placements as a whole, bit of an overview to kickstart these series before we start going into the specific areas. And I've got some great guests coming on for that later on in the series. So can you just give us a bit of an overview of your current role, Christie?
Yeah, absolutely. So you might guess from the title of my job, I'm very passionate about placements. I spend a lot of time thinking about placements and it's fantastic. So in my current role, I kind of strategically oversee placements within this whole of the School of Health Professions. So not just physio, but OT, paramedicine, optometry, dietetics, social work. I'm sure I've missed one there, and of course, physio. And that's my main role, as I'm the physio placement lead, as well as being a physio lecturer. Clinically, before I worked kind of in neuro and with children and young adults with complex neurodisability. And it was through being a clinical educator in those roles that it got me into teaching and got my links with the university. And here I am now.
Wow, so a really busy, full-on role, and having to organise an awful lot of students and placements at that. So probably quite a challenging role at times, I should imagine.
Yeah, it can be, but also a really rewarding role. So, and obviously in collaboration with the placement leads for each of those programs.
Definitely. And I think what this does as well, it just shows those who are watching this that behind the scenes of those placements that we go on, that we get really nervous about, that we then end up really enjoying and form such a crucial part of our learning. But behind all of that, there is just a phenomenal amount of coordination, communication, negotiation that goes on behind the scenes.
Absolutely.
To make those placements happen. But I just think it's really important for students to realise
absolutely
how much
it's a real teamwork thing, and it's obviously it relies on really close relationships between the universities and our practice partners. So yeah, it's a collaboration across the board. Yeah.
And when you delve into, I think I personally have always looked at it as I just think it's an amazing feat of coordination, really. I just think it's quite incredible that many students get a placement. And considering that the NHS is as busy as it is, and we still all get a placement. But what's really exciting now, and I think we're probably going to touch on, is the broad range of placements that are now available to our students. We're not just stuck, as good as they are, just being on a ward in a hospital. There are so many other options.
Absolutely not. Yeah, absolutely. So you said kind of NHS placements there. I mean, I think that's sometimes the expectation that placements are within the NHS, but the reality is it's so much broader than that. I think, PVI, so our private, voluntary and independent sector, charities, non-patient facing placements, placements have certainly opened up and changed a lot over the last few years, and it's really exciting time to be involved in placements.
Yeah, definitely. And do you think, I mean, the change, we're going to talk about how kind of to prepare for these placements and what to expect on them, but just want to touch on this a bit more on actually this change in the variety of placements reflects physiotherapy profession as a whole.
Absolutely. And I think that's really important to remember. I think the ultimate aim of placements is to prepare you for the workplace and to get you ready for the skills you're going to require. And we will all have very different career pathways, and there will be some skills that you take from every single role, and some of our skills will be similar in many settings, and different areas require different skills. And I think having a broad spectrum of skills will set you up for whatever career pathway you take. So many of them are transferable between settings. And I think that's really important to remember as a student when you go out on placement. You may have a really set idea in your head about where you think you might end up and where you think you want to go on placement. And I know from your own experience, James, I maybe sent you on placements that you wouldn't have been top of your list, but actually with a really open mind, you're able to go out and realize that every placement has great learning potential for you.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that probably will be a common theme in what we talk about. And I should imagine going through all of this series of interviews and videos that I'm going to do is that keeping an open mind and realizing that there are skills everywhere you go and from those experiences that you can take and transfer them. And that's a skill in itself, actually, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think as well, when we're thinking about keeping an open mind, I think particularly at the moment, physiotherapy has kind of, with social media and Twitter, people kind of communicate much more across kind of universities and things. So keep an open mind and remember that different universities will have a different approach to placements. And again, that's okay. So, you know, some universities will have placements through year 1, year 2, year 3. Some might be just in years 2 and 3. Some might have a larger number of placements, but they're shorter. Some might have a smaller number of placements, but they're longer. And again, that's okay. And, you know, when you're looking at universities, that'll be the sort of thing that you'll be looking at and doing your research when you think about where you want to apply, what will work for you, what works for your setup, how you think you best learn. But ultimately, we're all working as universities with the same common goal, and that is for you to have, you know, about 1,000 hours of clinical experience, practice-based learning in a variety of settings that will set you up to be ready for the workplace.
Definitely. And to touch on that from a student's point of view, being ready for the workplace is a very open term. I think everyone watching this needs to be aware that when you start as a band 5, unless you are probably the minority, you still won't feel ready for the workplace.
Absolutely.
Regardless of how many placements you have and even if you were to choose your perfect placements, you still probably won't feel ready. And that's because learning doesn't stop when you become a band 5.
And I think that's really, really important to acknowledge. So I think that's a really common theme that we sometimes see with our third years. They go into kind of their final year, first placement, really kind of excited. As they move through the year, they start to view their placements as, gosh, this is the last thing before I actually get out there and I'm worried I don't feel ready. And it's just reassuring them that, like you said, often nobody feels ready, but you are ready and you've made great progress through your placement journey. We wouldn't be, you wouldn't be going out there if we didn't believe in you and didn't believe you were ready.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So we use placements. I think everyone gets different things from placements. And I think something else that would come from this is trying not to compare yourself to your peers when it comes to placements.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Because we have different experiences and we will individually take from those experiences different things, and we're all at a different stage. Would you agree?
Yeah. So every student will be on a completely different placement journey. So you will all go out, you know, if you take a cohort of say 60 students, you might all be out on placement at the same time, but you will be on such a wide variety of placements. So, you know, you might be on an MSK, so musculoskeletal outpatient placement. Your peer might be on, you know, ITU. You might have somebody else who's in a community elderly rehab, somebody else who's working in a charity doing something very different. So trying to compare your experiences is going to be, you know, very difficult because you're all going to be experiencing different things, working with different patient groups, applying your skills and knowledge in different ways. But even if you are on a placement, 2 of you on the same placement block, so you might be on a ward and there could be 2 of you working with the same patients, same educators, again, your experiences are going to be different because you will each bring different knowledge, skills, prior experience to the placement. You might have different expectations, different aims, and you're all going to be different learners. So I think, you know, try not to compare yourself to your peers. I think talk to your peers, learn from what they're learning, but don't feel you've got to benchmark yourself against your peers. You know, this is your learning journey, your placement journey, and it's important that you optimize your learning opportunities.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. And also it's worth thinking at the end of the funnel, when you come out of university. I know I graduated and started working with several of people in my same year from the same university, and we're all really different, and it's great. We're able to work together with our own skills that we've brought from university. We're not all the same. We're not exactly the same student that have just been put into our band 5 rotations and expected to be exactly the same robots.
Oh, and how boring would the profession be if we were all
Yeah.
carbon copies of each other? It would be incredibly boring, and learning wouldn't continue because we'd all be at the same level. You know, if you all know different things and have different experiences, we can continue to learn from each other. So yeah, no, definitely,
No.
don't want a cohort all coming out exactly the same.
No, and also you then be able to use your own kind of collaborative skills. I know, for instance, currently in the moment, I'm working closely with someone who I graduated with who had, I think, more recent respiratory placement experience, and mine was a little while ago. So I've actually learned from him recently some more respiratory skills. We've seen some patients together and some more complex ones together. But we graduated at the same day, but we're
Yeah,
just different,
absolutely.
and it just
Yeah.
really well. So I think that's really important. So let's talk about preparing for placement, okay?
Yep.
Because I think what the reason that I've started this series is because I get a lot of people contact me, and it's great. I welcome it, asking me how do I prepare for this placement, that placement, and another, and there's quite obvious worries, but I
Yeah.
think mainly because of the unknown. So what sort of tips and things have you got, or any advice for students
Okay.
preparing?
So the first thing I would say about preparing for placements, and I kind of alluded to it, is I think preparing for placement starts even before you sign up to a program. It's about knowing what the expectations are and knowing kind of where placements sit within each program. So that should start right from the beginning when you're an applicant. Start to think about, okay, so I'm going to X university. How many placements am I going to have? How far am I going to have to travel? Am I prepared for that? Do I understand kind of the financial commitment, the time commitment, how this will impact on my family life? So I think preparation starts even before day dot, if I'm honest, James. I think it's having a really good idea before you come into the profession about what is required of the course. And I think that's really important. I think if you've done all that and then you're on the course, and then it's a different type of preparation. Then it's thinking more specifically about, okay, I'm going on to a placement in this area. How do I prepare for that? And I think you will prepare, again, everyone's different and everyone's going to be in different placements, so it's about finding a learning style and that suits you. I know there are some students who do lots and lots of preparatory work because they feel it helps them. I know some who find doing lots and lots of reading beforehand makes them feel more anxious and more stressed because they think then, you know, they overload themselves. So it's knowing who you are as a learner, knowing what the expectations are of that placement area as well. So once you know where you're going, talk to peers from maybe the year above who've been there, find out from them. A lot of universities will have kind of like peer assisted learning programs where you can talk to students who've been on placement and get real first-hand experience from them. You know, what should I do? What should I expect? I think if you're going on your first placement, don't set the bar too high for yourself. We're not expecting you to be going out there and running the ward, okay? It's maybe a good idea to start by looking at what your placement learning objectives are for the module. So having a little look and looking at the exact, you know, your assessment criteria to go, you know, what are they expecting me to do? And I think often you can judge by the wording what level we're expecting from you. And I think, you know, that's a really good starting place. Talking to your placement team, there will often be kind of placement briefing sessions that again will help you to explore what to expect on placement. Yeah, I think that's a good starting point. I think the other thing is to acknowledge that for the majority of students, and we see this again right through the interview process and all the way through the program, placements are the most exciting part. You know, it's not just me saying that because I'm passionate about it. For the majority of students, they are really excited about placement. But the flip side of that coin is it's also the part of the program that can cause the most anxiety and stress, which is why it doesn't surprise me that you get lots of emails asking for advice. You know, we know that and we acknowledge that, and your university teams are here to support you with that. So please don't be afraid to talk to your tutors, your placement links about what your concerns are. We will probably have heard your concerns before and we'll be able to support you and signpost you. And the other thing I would really start to think about, and we start to encourage our students with now, is thinking about your health and well-being on placement. It is a stressful time. You are going to be away from home for however long that placement block is. That could be 5 weeks, 6 weeks. If you know, you might be away from home in different accommodation. You might not have your peer support there. You might not have family support. You might not have your usual routines where normally you go to the gym 3 times a week to kind of maintain your health and well-being. So it's being prepared for that. And I've been trying to encourage students to maybe think of a wellbeing plan before they go on placement, to think about how will I manage that in this environment, because once you get there and the placement starts and you're into that cycle, it's sometimes quite hard then to address it. So thinking about what support mechanisms are in place and thinking about that beforehand. What do I need? What will work for me? How am I going to maintain that healthy placement life balance?
I love that well-being plan. I think that's fantastic. I think, and I definitely just mirror that. I've had my best placements experience, grade, and well-being were the ones where I carried on my physical activity quite a lot. I remember one of the best places I had. I was training for a half marathon running wise, and I was running 6 times a week throughout placement. But it took me to that point, because this was I think my first placement, my third year I think it was, but it took me to that point to realize I didn't need to spend 5 hours every night reading, studying. And it did take me a while to get to that point, but I can definitely sort of back up what you're saying there. Your well-being is vital to your performance as much as just feeling good.
Absolutely. And I think it's about, like I say, identifying what does well-being mean to you? How do I normally maintain my well-being when I'm at university? What will be different when I'm on placement, so that you're prepared for that? And then, okay, so it's going to be different, but what can I do to try and maintain that well-being? And I think that's a really important thing to think about.
Definitely. I think that's a really good point as well, is actually recognizing that you're not trying to replicate what you've got.
No.
Normally it's just adjusting and finding out, okay, what can I do, what's different, and what can I do to do what's right for me.
Absolutely. And I think about sustainability as well is really important. So what you were saying about, doing lots of study, often students go, well, oh, it's only 5 weeks or it's only 4 weeks. So, I can do that. I can do 4 hours a night study, but that's not a sustainable pattern to get yourself into. The behaviours that you kind of develop now on placement will be those that you will probably take forward into your working career. So you need to start to establish some sustainable kind of work life patterns now as a student. That's not to say you shouldn't do any reading while you're on placement. You should, and you will get more out of it if you can do a little bit of study and work and reading around. But it's about being kind to yourself and thinking about what is a sustainable approach to placement.
Definitely. So talking about that, I think that's quite a good one to start talking about as well, is how much work should you be doing in the evenings, weekends, whilst on placement? Now, I know you're not going to say it should be 1 hour, 15 minutes or anything like that, but what would your response be to a student that comes to you with that kind of question?
Again, I think it needs to go back to, it will depend on what stage you are in the program in terms of how much work you might need to do. It might be that on a first or second placement you need to do a little bit more reading around, because you need to kind of understand a bit more about some of the conditions you're coming across. By the time you're into third year, you've got a lot more kind of theoretical knowledge to draw upon, so potentially a bit more of that theory is kind of there, and it's more about application of your skills. Having said that, though, as a third year, there are higher expectations on you. So there might be that you're being expected to, look at papers or evidence-based approaches a lot more, and your educator might have some expectations of what reading you should be doing. I think it will also depend on the type of learner you are. Like we've just said, I know there are some people who don't feel they're going to get the most out of their placement unless they are doing some reading. I think this is one of the things where I think you're right, there isn't a black and white answer to that. I think you should expect to be doing some self-directed study whilst you're on placement, but it certainly shouldn't be taking over your free time. And I think you need to be transparent, and you need to be talking to your placement educator about that, about what expectations there are. There may be circumstances where you need to do a bit more. So say, for example, you're on a placement that you're finding particularly hard and maybe you're struggling. It might be that is a time when you do need to do some extra reading. Or it might be that that's something you need to talk to your educator about and say, I am really struggling with this. Is there another way we can approach it? So yeah, I think it will depend. I think you should expect to do some reading, but it shouldn't be taking over. I think you should talk to your placement educator and also your university link tutor about how much work you're doing. And that's kind of our role as well when we kind of have those midway chats with you. How much reading are you doing? And if a student says to me, I'm reading 5 hours a night, I'd be like, oh, there's something kind of not quite right there. Let's have a look. Why do you feel the need to do that? And start to unpick it and maybe talk to their educator with them to see what's going on there.
Okay, no, that's good. I think one thing that I always go back to this a lot because it's why I started these videos actually, and that's reflections. And it's also something that I used to spend far too much time unnecessarily doing. So they weren't focused. They were a scattergun approach to reflections. But have you got your thoughts on reflections whilst on placements?
So I think reflecting whilst you're on placement is really, really important. I think, being a reflective practitioner is one of kind of HCPC standards and CSP standards. It's a requirement. So we do need to be reflecting on practice. But my tip would be not to reflect for the sake of reflecting. I think some people do it as a tick box exercise, and that's not really reflecting. I think we're also, as a profession, probably very good at reflecting in some situations. So I think we often reflect when things haven't gone well. We can be sometimes overly critical. I think as a student, it's also too important to reflect on things that have gone well. Because then when you're having those days where things are not so good, you can look back and go, yeah, but look, this is when things have gone well. What did I do then that made that work? Let's try and put that into practice. How frequently you reflect, I think, again, I don't think you should say, I'm going to do one reflection a week, because again, I think that becomes meaningless. I think you should reflect on things that have happened that really have meaning. Sort of think about what do I want to be able to reflect on? What learning has occurred? What has really stuck out in this placement for me? So like I say, things that have gone well, things that have not gone so well, things that you found challenging, things that you would do differently, things that surprised you, all those kind of things will help. And I think the other thing sometimes I talk to my third years about is when they're starting their third year and they're going out on placement and they talk to me, what should I reflect on? I say, well, look at some of the job descriptions, look at some of the skills that your employers are going to want. So, if they are saying we want evidence of problem solving, communication skills, team working, when you're in practice, if you have a good example of when things have worked well as a team approach, reflect on it, because you then have evidence to be able to provide when you're starting to think about applying for jobs. Again, I'm not saying kind of cherry pick your reflections, but it does help you to think about what kind of things you should be reflecting on.
Yeah, it gives you some structure. But yeah,
Absolutely.
I think that was the
Yeah.
key. Another tip that I had, I think it was in the interview I did with Andrew McCauley. Actually, it was about that focus on what are you going to do about that reflection? How is that going to change your practice?
Absolutely. And I would say that is probably the biggest thing that we see is sometimes people think they're reflecting, but they're actually just describing. And I think that's a skill. We certainly see it quite a lot with our undergrad students, that they're quite descriptive in their reflections. And I think reflecting is a real skill to develop. So find a framework that you like, I would say. Find one that's definitely got more of a focus on the analysis and the evaluation. If you find when you look back at your description, there's more words in the description bit than there is in the analysis or the action bit, you probably need to reframe the way that you're reflecting. And just continually ask yourself that so what question. You describe something, well, so what? So what? Why have I taken the time to write about this or talk about this? What is it about this that makes this experience important? What have I learned? What would I take from it? What will I do differently in the future? And that's the important bit of reflective practice for me.
Definitely. And I think you've hit the nail on the head there, that it is a skill. So I'd also say, in your first year, don't expect to get reflections perfect.
No.
Because
it will evolve as you go through, definitely. But the only way you'll get better at it is by sharing them. And I would say one thing I found from placement is often students are anxious about sharing their reflections with their educators. And actually, often educators will say, I think they're reflecting, but they haven't really shown them to me. And so, I would really encourage you to do that as a student, to, when you've done a reflection, whether that's verbally or written, show it to your educator, talk through, and they'll be able to guide you and go, well, that's great, but how did that make you feel? And what did you do differently? I know reflection can sometimes feel quite personal, so that might feel difficult, particularly if it's something that you've found challenging or think that you've not done well. But actually, if it's something that you've not done well, your educator will have known that you've not done well. And so you can show them what you've learned from that experience by reflecting on it. So it's a great teaching and learning opportunity for you and your educator.
I remember getting some feedback actually about that. And when I did centre reflection, and some of my feedback was the fact that I was able to recognise things I needed to improve before the educator was told me that.
Absolutely, yeah.
So that's, yeah, so good. I think I'm a big fan of reflections once you've got it right. I think until you get it right, they don't seem as useful. And the other thing, again, I also found, this is right at the end, and I do more so now, is going back. So you've done your sort of what happens, so what, and then what are you going to do about it? And then do something about it, and then go back and re-reflect on that, and take it.
Definitely. Just go back, flick back through your last few and go, did I actually action that? Did I? Because it's very easy to go, oh, next time I will do this, and it sounds brilliant, and then you kind of think, well, did I?
Exactly.
What learning has occurred?
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
Just so another big point as well, is grades. Now, I know not all placements are graded. I think that's really worth noting.
Absolutely.
But any kind of tips on grades and how you're, as a student, how you deal with that on placement, how focused you get or not get on grades?
So I guess there's two sides to the coin, isn't there? Because as a university and as a placement lead, I would say to students not to get too hung up on grades. I would say, you're there for the learning experience. At the end of the day, no one will ask you, what grade you got on your placement. They will ask you about the knowledge and skills and experiences and the things that you gained and developed from that placement that will make you a better practitioner. And so for me, that's what's important. A number doesn't make you necessarily a better practitioner. It's what learning has occurred. But I also see from a student perspective that the grades matter to students. I do understand that. In all other areas of your degree, you are marked, your essays are marked, your exams are marked. And if your placements are marked, the marks do matter. In my experience, the students who are focused on the grades, though, are not the students who do well on placement. And I would say by focusing on taking every learning opportunity, reflecting, developing yourself, improving will lead to probably better marks in the long run. So take the focus off the mark and the mark will often follow is probably the advice that I would give. And if the mark doesn't follow, it's not the end of the world. Like I've said, nobody is going to ask you in an interview, what mark did you get on your MSK placement? They're likely to say, tell me about what you learnt from your MSK placement. I don't know if that's what you would think as a student as well.
It's something that I came to realise, and I think if for those of you who follow the channel will have seen the video I did on grades, and it completely reiterates what you said there, is they're important, and I don't think we should necessarily ignore them as students, but we should put them in the context of the overall picture. And the bigger picture is the fact that, as you rightly said, when you get interviewed, the chances are you're going to get asked, what did you learn from that placement? Your experiences, what did you do, how did you learn, how did you change your practice? Those are the sorts of questions that you don't get asked. So did you get over 80% in that, or did you get, you only got 40%? They just don't do that.
No, they don't. I mean, marks are useful and they do have their place, because you can, as a student, you can see how you are progressing and you can see your own development. But I think it's important not to get too hung up on them. And I think also, those programs that do have placement marks that contribute to degree classification, it's good that your skills on placement are recognized on placement. But again, it's not, the marks aren't the be all and end all. It's really important to keep some perspective on that.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Fantastic, Christy. Right. Any other kind of overall tips that you might have for anyone watching this who's got a placement coming up soon, say?
Okay, so if you've got a placement coming up soon, I would say embrace every opportunity, every opportunity in terms of physio, but also interprofessional. I think placements are one of the really great opportunities to work with people from a range of different professions. So you might talk about it in university, but actually it's not until you kind of get out on placement that you might get to work alongside an OT, see what they do, see what they contribute to patient care. And I think it's through those interactions that you can really understand what physio contributes as well. It's only by really understanding our bit of the puzzle, by seeing everybody else, that you can really understand where physio fits in. So embrace every opportunity. Be prepared to think outside the box sometimes. I think on placement, things may not be exactly how you were expecting. That's okay. Be prepared to maybe shelf your expectations and be a bit more open-minded. Obviously, if you're concerned and placement isn't adding up to what you expect, then that's where your placement link tutor should come in and the university. Use them. As somebody who supports students on placement a lot, I really like it when students get in contact, not just when they're having problems, but even if you just drop them an email at the end of the week to tell them about the exciting things you've been doing. We want to hear about your placement experiences. We are really interested in what you're doing and you're learning. Remember, the university is always there to support you, so use all the mechanisms in place. And remember, I would say using your peers as well. So you might be diversely spread across the whole of a locality while you're on placement, but you have your phones, you have WhatsApp, you have ways to keep in touch. So again, thinking about well-being and support, set up, Wellbeing Wednesdays, where you're going to make a phone call to your mates on placement and see how you're getting on and talk about, not comparing what you're doing, but talking about things that are going well or not so well. Check in on each other, look after each other.
Definitely. Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I think, yeah, that's a really, really good tips there. It's a good overview of kind of preparing and being on placement. I think it's a daunting but really, really exciting time during a university degree.
Absolutely.
Just forms
I'd love to go back and do my placements again.
Yes, yeah, I would as well. And I loved placement. I really did, and I think most people do. It just so happens that I think we pin a lot of hopes on it, and the closer we get to it, the more nervous we get. But as I say to a lot of people, the fact that you're nervous about something quite often means you care.
Absolutely.
That's a good thing.
Yeah.
It's okay to be nervous. It's okay to be worried, and it's also okay to sort of have the odd hiccup as well. So
absolutely, you will not get everything right on placement. You will make mistakes. You know, as long as you learn from your mistakes, that's what's really important. And remember, you're not only has your educator been a student, your university lecturer has also been a student. We have all been there. We have all been on placement. We do understand what it's like, and we understand your concerns. And I'm a big believer in talking about what your worries are, and being open about them will make it easier. The other thing I would really say from my own placement experiences and what I often see with students is, like I say, keep an open mind. Often people will think, I definitely want to be an MSK physio, or I definitely want to be a respiratory physio. And they sometimes then shut off in their mind other placements and feel disappointed when they maybe look and go, oh, I've got a placement in such and such an area. For me personally, I thought I was on a very different trajectory to where I ended up, and it was placements that set me on a different pathway. And kind of, I was determined this is going to make James laugh, but I was going to be an MSK sports physio all the way. That was going to be me. There was going to be no stirring from that path. And it was through placements. I had placements in learning disabilities, neuro. I had MSK placements, which I loved, respiratory, but it was opening up those other areas that I wasn't maybe so aware of, that then led me down a very different path.
fantastic. Okay, brilliant. Well, Christy, I think we've covered so much there already. Just as an overview of placements, it just shows how big a deal placements are, because we've captured loads, and I'm sure we could probably carry on talking for another couple of hours. So before you go though, can you just let me know, what was your favorite placement when you were a student?
Oh, wow, really good question, because I honestly enjoyed all of my placements as a student. But top for me, I had a learning disabilities placement, and I think it was in Weymouth Pool area. And again, it was something that I hadn't considered in terms of a placement experience, hadn't really thought about the role of physio in learning disabilities. It put me outside of my comfort zone, which is probably why I enjoyed it the most. It challenged me in terms of my communication skills, my own kind of beliefs around physio, what I thought physio practice looked like. And so, yeah, I think for me, that was my favourite placement without a doubt.
Fab. Yeah, I think that just captures everything we've been talking about, and keeping an open mind.
Yeah, definitely.
Last question is this one. I haven't prepared you for this one.
Oh gosh.
if you weren't a physio, what would you be?
That is a really good question. So when I was growing up, I wanted to be either a teacher or a physio. And so I think as a physio lecturer, I managed to capture both.
Yeah.
But if I had my time again, I would definitely be a physio. But if physio wasn't on the plate, I really like the thought of being a paramedic. I would really, it's a really exciting profession.
Yeah. Okay, so for any paramedics watching this, what makes paramedics so appealing? Because I know we do get allied health professionals watching these.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I just think the broad range of patients they get to work with, settings, I really admire their ability to cope under immense pressure. I think it's just an incredibly challenging and exciting, dynamic profession.
Brilliant. Oh, that's fantastic. I think, and what I love is you've kept in with the allied health professions as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Who
Getting-
would want to do anything else?
what also is great is it's such a different profession, but in the allied health.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
So it does it incorporates a lot that physio does with the broad nature of things, but it's just that acute, very you can't get much more acute than a paramedic.
Yeah, I like the idea of being there for people in a real moment when they really need somebody. And I think there's that, it's exciting, it's dynamic, but it's got that very human touch as well, which I think all our AHP professions have.
Yeah, definitely. So you heard it here, folks. Any allied health professionals watching, physios love all other AHPs.
Absolutely. Yes, indeed.
Without each other, we're nothing. Together, we're everything. So it's great. So, Christy, thank you so much for kickstarting this placement series. So, for those of you watching, it's going to be a really great series. We've got some great people lined up to talk to you through about respiratory, neuro, MSK, orthopedics, trauma, ICU. Pretty much you name it. Hopefully, we've got it. And I'm sure I'm going to miss some, and I'm going to get some more people wanting to come on and talk to you about those placements. So, without further ado, thank you so much, Christy, and
Thank you.
we'll probably catch up with you another time. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Bye.